So what triggers earthquakes? And are other parts of the world at greater risk just because the quake hit Nepal and was of 7.9 magnitude? We're going to talk about what the experts think, and I'd like to introduce my guest to you right now. Jolly Amatya was just here with us a few moments ago, and she's sticking around for this segment. Thanks so much. Dr. Bart Rossi back with us again. We have on satellite Dr. John Tabor, who is the Education and Outreach Director at Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology, shortened, that's IRIS. Thank you very much for coming. And Dr. Alexander Gates is right next to me. You're a geologist and professor at Rutgers University. Thank you also for coming today. This is very interesting because we talked in the last segment about how Nepal sits right on some shifting tectonic plates, and we're told that this may not be the last earthquake we're going to see as a result of that. As a matter of fact, the next one could be within the next 15 years. Perhaps the energy has not yet been released from that pressure that's built up. Are you expecting this?
There are earthquakes in that area all the time. I mean, right now, what happened is India actually was a separate continent and collided with the southern part of Asia starting about 30 million years ago, and it continues to drive northward at 5 centimeters a year. So it is actually moving northward at 2.5 inches every single year, and so all that stress builds up, and all the earthquakes from Afghanistan to China are the result of that.
So, Dr. Tabor, can I ask you then, are we saying that not only is another earthquake of this magnitude likely, but it's inevitable? Are you able to hear
Yes, it's inevitable. And
is.
some of the concern is that you're going to see it along the same fault.
7.9 magnitude on the Richter scale?
What happens is you have...
Go ahead.
Right, you can have one that large or even larger.
Even larger. Now that's so difficult to imagine and extremely frightening. And is it likely that this shifting of these plates in Nepal are going to impact other areas around the globe or just in that vicinity? How does that work?
Well, you can get triggered earthquakes a number of different ways. You can trigger the ones right next door, which we were just talking about, but the seismic waves from a big earthquake travel all the way around the world. And so sometimes they trigger little earthquakes, but there have been studies recently that show that you can even get an earthquake greater than magnitude 5.5 that happens because it was building up the stress, it was getting ready to break, and then the wave came by and triggered it early. So it can actually trigger earthquakes around the world.
This is, I mean, I don't know if we're seeing increased incidences of earthquakes, but I remember the one in Turkey that killed like 14,000 people. This one, we've got at least 8,000 dead. This is just plain scary. This is very frightening, and the thought that Nepal might see another one in the very near future is frightening. I don't know what you feel about that. You've still got friends and family there now coping with this.
Yes. Yes, I definitely do have a lot of friends and family. In fact, like I mentioned earlier, my immediate family, my mother, my father, my uncle and aunts, they're fine, but it depends on what you call family. Whole Nepal, the people is a family to me. So it is me being a student and a Nepali living outside the country and living in the United States. Along with a lot of other millions of students outside the world, we're feeling, I've never seen this kind of unity, this feeling of unity among the youth. And like we just discussed that there's, it might be inevitable for another earthquake to come. We still do not know. Like I mentioned before, there's constant fear. Like even though the people who have their houses right there, which have not collapsed, they've rather decided to, just sit outside. Whether it's been raining hard, the heavy rainfall has been one of the struggles, and it's been a challenge for the rescue efforts. So I cannot even start to imagine what destruction and what devastation might happen if another one strikes, and this is just beyond.
And if we're talking about within the next 10, 15 years possibly, as some do predict, then Dr. Rossi, how do you even live with that kind of stress?
Right, and what I'm concerned about as a psychologist is the post-traumatic stress after an event like this.
They won't even have recuperated from this before.
Exactly, because there's short-term post-traumatic stress where people become very hyper-vigilant, and they're so concerned about what's going to happen, and their fears come to light. And in the long run, they also become a personality problem for them because they're hypervigilant and obsessive compulsive in their daily life in the long term. So now we have short-term and long-term problems that are emotional as a result of something like this. So I'm concerned about how we manage this type of problem emotionally. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Gates, let me ask you something, because I saw that there was a U.S. Geological Survey. The scientists with this group estimate there's a 70% probability that at least one magnitude 6.7 or greater quake is going to strike San Francisco before 2030. When we're being told things like this, like Nepal is absolutely going to expect another earthquake. San Francisco is going to be hit with something huge, maybe in the next 10, 15 years itself. How do we use that knowledge and put it to good use as opposed to just living in constant fear and stress?
Well, I mean, we already, you know, people say we can't predict earthquakes, but we actually can predict pretty much where they're going to be. The problem is predicting the exact timing. So any place where you have two tectonic plates meeting, which includes San Francisco, the San Andreas Fault is a boundary between two tectonic plates. And so when you have the meeting, you are constantly going to get earthquakes. So it's just a matter of time before the next one comes along. So we can predict where they are, and then if we have enough money, we can then engineer our way to be able to not have them cause as much damage. Yeah, but otherwise they're going to keep going.
Well, Dr. Tabor, how does knowing where these tectonic plates are, and I don't know to what degree of accuracy you can predict where things are going to happen, but how do you utilize that to the best effect for the people in those areas? I know there are plates shifting right under us here in this eastern seaboard area as well, aren't there?
Well, the edges of the plates are far away from the eastern seaboard, but what we really can predict, particularly when you're near a plate boundary, if we can figure out about the size of the earthquakes that are going to happen over 50 or 100 years, that's when you can then design your building to survive that kind of shaking. And that's why in the U.S. we've really changed the building design a lot. Well, it's actually costs you less to do proper building over the long term. The hard part, of course, is over 5 years it's going to cost you more. But over the time period over which the earthquake happens, you're going to save money by proper engineering. Well, and also, every individual can do something. Every person can be prepared for an earthquake by having an earthquake kit if they're in an earthquake area. They can all know that they should drop, cover, and hold on if they feel an earthquake, because a lot of the damage from earthquakes is things coming in the U.S. anyway, coming down from ceilings. And so if you can just drop and cover yourself, you're likely to be much less likely to be injured. So there's a lot you can do as an individual as well as on the national basis.
I saw a quote, and it sounds like it's being very flippant, but it said, earthquakes don't kill people, buildings do. So on an individual level, it seems maybe there's something we could do to safeguard ourselves in our own homes.
Well, I mean, the construction of buildings is the big thing. So, I mean, in areas where you have a lot of earthquakes that have the money to build, as was just pointed out, they tend to try to make buildings that are much safer. So, for example, we had an earthquake in 1989 in San Francisco that was a 7.1. and it killed about 76 people. We had an earthquake in Haiti in 2010, many years later, that the official death toll is right now, it's probably not as high, but it's 320,000 people. So then the difference between the two, they were both about the same magnitude, but the building structures in San Francisco, they update them every single time they have an earthquake, and they make those buildings basically as earthquake resistant as possible.
And then that takes me back to Nepal, and if they don't have the money to begin with, what do they do?
Exactly. That's definitely I think one of the biggest challenges, because now we can definitely learn lessons, and now whatever construction will be going on, people who will build houses, every one of us has learned a lesson that we'll invest more money if we can, we'll invest more research into it before we start any construction and any offices or buildings or whatever in our country. That's something to really learn, and I believe that everybody will be pretty serious about this.
It's tough though, when you have so-called first world nations like ours that have a crumbling infrastructure to begin with, and then I look at a country like Nepal, and especially when you get into the outlying areas, where in the world does that money come from? Now, Indiegogo funds will help with the immediate after effects of this earthquake, but what do? Do you continue this forever? And is the interest there to keep putting money into an effort for preventative measures? Because we don't tend to focus on that as much as the after effects.
Right.
No, and you know, we're talking about learning here. Psychologists are also learning about how to deal with a stress like this, because what happens is you have to look at the short run and how to help these people immediately, and then you have to look at the post-traumatic stress over time. And there are certain techniques that we can impose now on the short run that are very helpful. And I think we're learning from these experiences how to deal with human behavior and some of the thoughts and the fear that we're coping with. So we are making progress in a lot of different ways on how to handle this. Obviously, we don't want to have to handle it, but it is there.
And also, I think one of our incentives of our campaign is also for rehabilitation, also for sustainability. We plan to give awareness and more education to all those people in the remote areas and village areas about how to take precautions. Just if another disaster happens like this, how can one be safe? You know, there are a lot of people, they don't even go to schools, no education in those areas. How are they going to cope up with that? Maybe some lives could have been prevented had they known what to do as soon as the earthquake hit. Yeah, so these are the things that we really want to focus on, having awareness programs in all the villages and remote areas, basic knowledge about health, sanitation, how to survive after the earthquake and other disasters like this. That's also one of our major incentives that we want to do in future.
I want to ask both Dr. Tabor and Dr. Gates, how accurate, you talk about we are getting better at predicting when earthquakes are going to happen. Are we talking about like in general terms, or you could say like Nepal should expect one by 2018? You know, how down to the wire can we make it?
It's not very accurate. I mean, there was one, to tell you the truth, in history where they actually acted on, there was one earthquake that was predicted well.
Really?
And that was in Haicheng, China in 1975. Wow. They predicted it down to within a few hours.
Wow.
They evacuated people. 2,000 people were killed. They estimate that they saved 150,000 lives from that estimate, from that prediction.
Great.
That was the only one really that's been predicted that well. I mean, even there was a case in Lachia in Italy in 2009 where a person who was monitoring told his what he found was that he thought there was going to be an earthquake, and he started telling people that they should take cover because they thought there was going to be an earthquake, and the board got together and had him arrested because he was causing a
panic,
trouble.
Yeah, fire in a crowded theater.
And the earthquake actually happened, and they threw the entire board into jail. They were all convicted and thrown into jail. So sometimes it's bad to make predictions.
Yeah, I have to pitch in one small thing that I had myself read articles on the newspapers and news channels saying that Nepal is vulnerable, like the earthquake is going to come. I myself remember reading all those articles like time and again, but we didn't know when to expect it.
To do. I'm sorry, I have to cut us off because we're completely out of time. And Dr. Tabor, I'm sorry, I wanted to get back to you too, but thank you all so much for being here. And when we come back, Fresh Outlook's lightning round. These are the stories that had everybody talking this week. We'll be back.